continue. Nothing can justify the horrific acts of terror committed by Hamas and other armed groups in Israel on the 7th of October. And nothing can justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. Mr. President, in recent weeks, Israeli military operations and fighting intensified across Gaza. Rockets continue to be launched by Palestinian armed groups from Gaza towards Israeli population centers. Rafah is in ruins, and the Rafah crossing remains closed, further hampering humanitarian operations. Almost 2 million people have been displaced, nearly the entire population of Gaza, and many of them multiple times. Nowhere in Gaza is safe. Meanwhile, the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification Partnership reports that almost 500,000 people face catastrophic levels of food insecurity. Communicable diseases are on the rise. Chokeholds on the fuel supply have severely reduced access to water, sanitation, hygiene, and health services. The United Nations remains committed to delivering life-saving aid in Gaza, but we face severe challenges and deadly risks. Humanitarian convoys are frequently unable to collect and distribute life-saving goods in safety, including from the crucial Kerem Abu Salem, Kerem Shalom crossing. Attacks on humanitarian aid workers and shelters, as well as strikes on or near health and humanitarian facilities, continue. Lawlessness and criminality are rampant. The parties must fundamentally and urgently change their conduct to address these challenges. The humanitarian notification system and other coordination mechanisms are not effective, resulting in delayed and aborted aid missions and the exposure of humanitarians to mortal risk. The UN still does not have the necessary security equipment in Gaza to manage the extreme risks that our personnel face. Despite ongoing dialogue with Israeli authorities and some improvements, much more is needed. The entry of humanitarian aid at scale and its delivery to all parts of Gaza are essential to the survival and well-being of civilians. We need consistent access through all crossing points and better access to those in need wherever they are. It is long past time for a safe, enabling environment for effective humanitarian operations in Gaza in line with international humanitarian law. Mr. President, as much of the world's attention is focused on Gaza, the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, faces perilous conditions. High levels of violence persist, including by Israeli security forces, settlers, and Palestinian armed groups. Between the 7th of October 2023 and the 17th of July 2024, 557 Palestinians, including 138 children, were killed in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem. The vast majority were killed in the context of Israeli security operations, including during subsequent exchanges with Palestinian armed groups. These include 540 killed by Israeli forces, 10 by Israel's settlers, and 7 where it remains unknown whether the perpetrators were Israeli forces or settlers. During the same period, 22 Israelis, including 9 members of Israeli forces, were killed by Palestinians in Israel and occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Meanwhile, Israeli measures are undermining the Palestinian Authority, crippling the Palestinian economy, and driving instability. This month, the Israeli Security Cabinet approved a series of punitive steps against the Palestinian Authority. The steps reportedly include the legalization, under Israeli law, of 5 Israeli outposts in the occupied West Bank, the advancement of thousands of settlement housing units, and demolitions in parts of Area B in the occupied West Bank. At the same time, the Israeli finance minister lifted the suspension of the transfer to the Palestinian Authority of partial clearance revenues. These revenues are collected by Israel on behalf of the Palestinians. He also renewed for 4 months the letter of indemnity for Israeli correspondent banking with Palestinian banks. Both of these measures are critical for Palestinian fiscal stability. But, once again, much more is required. Mr. President, recent developments are driving a stake through the heart of any prospect for a two-state solution. The geography of the occupied West Bank is steadily being altered through Israeli administrative and legal steps. The seizure of large land parcels in strategic areas and changes to planning, land management, and governance are expected to significantly accelerate settlement expansion. These changes include the issuance of 2 military orders at the end of May. These orders transferred powers to and appointed a civilian deputy in Israel's civil administration, which is alarming. This move is another significant advance in the ongoing transfer of authority over many aspects of daily life in the occupied West Bank, and a further step towards extending Israeli sovereignty over this occupied territory. If left unaddressed, these measures risk causing irreparable damage. Mr. President, we must change course. All settlement activity must cease immediately. Israeli settlements are a flagrant violation of international law and a key obstacle to peace. The violence must end, and the perpetrators of the violence must be swiftly brought to justice. Israel must ensure the safety and security of the Palestinian population. Mr. President, the United Nations is sparing no effort to deliver humanitarian assistance to Palestinians in Gaza and to secure the release of all hostages held by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups. Those being held hostage have been suffering, along with their families, for far too long. We need an immediate humanitarian ceasefire and the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. With the tireless efforts of Egypt, Qatar, and the United States, negotiations to formulate a deal for the release of the hostages and a ceasefire continue with some reported progress. The parties must reach such a deal now. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is a moral stain on us all. International humanitarian law must be respected at all times and by all parties. We must intensify efforts to increase humanitarian aid delivery. International support to these efforts is critical, particularly for the essential work of UNRWA. Amid continued reports of serious abuses against Palestinians in Israeli custody, I reiterate that all detainees must be treated humanely and those held without lawful cause must be released. And this terrible war must end. We must refocus on finding a political solution that will end the occupation and resolve the conflict in line with international law and relevant United Nations resolutions. Ensuring that governance is restored in Gaza under a single, legitimate Palestinian government is essential to that effort. Support to the Palestinian Authority is critical. Its institutions must be strengthened so that it is prepared to govern and lead recovery and reconstruction efforts in Gaza. All those with influence must take the urgent steps needed to enable the parties to re-engage on the long-delayed political path towards ending the occupation and resolving the conflict. This must occur in line with international law, relevant UN resolutions and bilateral agreements in pursuit of the vision of two states, Israel and an independent, democratic, contiguous, viable, and sovereign Palestinian state, living side by side in peace and security within secure and recognized borders on the basis of the pre-1967 lines, with Jerusalem as the capital of both. The United Nations will continue to support all such efforts. Mr. President, this concludes the remarks of the Secretary General. I thank you.
I thank
Mr. Rattray for his briefing, and I now give the floor to the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine.
Mr. President, allow me at the outset to express our appreciation for Your Excellency's decision to take part and to chair this meeting at ministerial level, and to the Chief de Cabinet of the Secretary General for his briefing. Mr. President, there is an old Greek proverb that says, and I quote, "A society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in." End of quotation. This is the international law-based order put in place by those who endured or witnessed the worst tragedies, tree by tree, to provide shade to future generations. Israel has uprooted every one of those trees in Gaza. It breached every rule ever elaborated, every principle humanity pledged to uphold. It killed those most entitled to protection, civilians, including children, humanitarians, doctors, journalists. It defied every nation on earth and every organ ever set up to uphold the most fundamental rules, from the highest political organs to the highest judicial body, from the Security Council and the General Assembly to the ICJ. Israel is doing so unapologetically. It is committing crimes openly, brazenly, and repeatedly. Its own soldiers do not hesitate to share recordings of those crimes with the rest of the world. What is happening in Gaza will go down as the most documented genocide in history. Till when will the world denounce the crimes and tolerate their reoccurrence? Till when will it consider that its responsibility is to state the law instead of upholding it? Palestinians in Gaza do not need to hear the world talk about the uprooted trees. They need their protective shade. They could care less that we all agree on what the rules say and that we all observe and recognize their breach. What is a rule that is not enforced? What do these rules mean anymore when for 9 months Israel has bombed the homes, the hospitals, the schools, including those designated as UN shelter, and now is bombing people in tents, as the case in the Mawasi? How cruel could you be? How criminal must you be to bomb the same population over and over and over again? And since bombs and bullets are not good enough in this collective punishment and genocide enterprise, Israel has decided to impose the most horrific conditions on those who survive. We have seen Israel for months now manufacture a humanitarian catastrophe with famine at its core. We have seen it yield starvation, dehydration, and the spread of diseases as the ultimate weapons. 2 million people who were subjected to a 17-year-old blockade are now confronted with a hermetic siege, dying of hunger and disease, while food and medicine are available only meters away. Until now, Israel considered it was enough to shout security to get away with the worst crimes imaginable, as if its security could legitimize genocide, colonization, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, as if its security could justify denying the most fundamental rights of a nation and the most basic rights of millions of Palestinians, as if its security could be achieved by more killing and more injustice. It pretended the blockade was about security. It only harmed innocent civilians. It pretended its walls and military rules were about security. Their true colonial nature is evident to all those willing to see. It pretended that every war would be the last and would achieve deterrence. It simply laid the seeds for another war a few years later. Since 1948, successive Israeli governments have said they got rid of the Palestinian problem once and for all. Since the Nakba, which constituted one of the most terrible attempts to uproot an entire nation in modern history. After that, Israeli leaders pretended they never heard of Palestine or the Palestinians, denying the very existence of the people they had killed and expelled. In 1967, they were certain that by occupying whatever was left of the land of historic Palestine, they had eliminated the problem altogether. In 1982, they explained that if they invaded Lebanon and forced the PLO to move far away from Palestine's borders, this would be the end of the Palestine question. In 1988, when the Palestinian rebellion erupted in Palestine itself in a peaceful way, it explained that breaking the bones of the demonstrators, literally breaking them, would deter them. In 2000, it explained that the best way to deal with the second intifada, more walls, more oppression, more occupation. In 2008, 2009, 2012, 2014, 2016, 2018, 2021, and 2022, it explained that a blockade over 2 million people and repeated assaults and should lead it will get away with it. It is betting this time will be no exception. But this time must be the exception. And change must start right now. Mr. President, this Security Council adopted Resolution 2735 to achieve an immediate ceasefire leading to a permanent cessation of hostilities. This would not restore the lives of those killed or the limbs of those amputated. It would not remove the pain from a mother's heart or the fear haunting a child's mind, but it would save lives and stop agony's march. It would lead to the release of hostages and prisoners on both sides. It would allow a surge in humanitarian aid. It would lead to immediate regional de-escalation. It would help preserve whatever faith is left in our multilateral system. But Netanyahu does not care about Palestinian lives, or even the hostage's life. He does not care about international law or human decency. He only cares about his own political survival. So what will you do to ensure he is not the one calling the shots? And here I'm talking to you, the Security Council. What are you going to do in order to stop this lunatic from continuing this genocidal war against the Palestinian people? Mr. President, in recent weeks, there were collective statements stressing that ICJ decisions are binding and must be respected, defending the independence of the ICC and rejecting attacks against it. There were shared commitments on UNRWA, to which all Council members, present and incoming, subscribed together with over 100 countries around the world. There is a global consensus in support of the Palestinian people's right to self-determination and the two-state solution in line with UN resolutions and international law. There is more convergence on the Palestine question than on any other matter on the international agenda. And there is one isolated, fanatic government rejecting this international consensus and attacking every institution entrusted with upholding the international law-based order, accusing its representatives of this order of terrorism and anti-Semitism, killing, detaining, torturing, harassing, intimidating them. Till when will we pretend this government is anything else than what it proclaims to be? Till when its whims will trump international will? Mr. President, our people will live in freedom and dignity on their ancestral land. They will accept nothing less. They will accept nothing else. But fulfilling this right should not come at a price. There is a parallel world in which the international community upheld the rules, in which all nations gathered and took concrete steps to ensure compliance and violations, to stop the war and advance peace. Palestinian civilian and no Israeli civilian, no Palestinian child and no Israeli child are harmed, where life has prevailed, where two states, Palestine and Israel, live side by side in peace and security, where Palestine is free and future generations take for granted the peace achieved. Where our region has unleashed its full potential as our destinies no longer collide but move forward together. Being killed, maimed, oppressed, detained, starved, displaced is not our fate. There is a path that leads to shared peace and prosperity. It is your duty to take every step necessary to reach that destination. Start today. Strengthen those who seek peace rather than arm those who seek extermination. Sanction those who colonize rather than allowing them to punish those who oppose the uprooting and displacement of communities. Protect the victims rather than the perpetrators. Recognize the state of Palestine rather than witness the destruction of the two-state solution. Render your relations with the parties subject to their compliance with the law and the legitimate requirements of peace. Achieve the well-known solution to this political conflict by ending the Israeli occupation, and don't wait till it is transformed into achieve the well-known solution to this political conflict by ending the Israeli occupation, and don't wait till it is transformed into a never-ending religious war. In 2 days, the highest judicial body on earth will render its authoritative opinion on the question of Palestine and on the illegality of the colonial annexationist and supremacist Israeli occupation. I'm referring to the International Court of Justice. This expression of the law should serve as basis for our collective action in the days to come. The law, nothing less, nothing else. All your nations refuse to forego their rights. The Palestinian people will never accept to relinquish theirs. Peace will not be achieved at the expense of our rights, but by upholding them. The right to life, to liberty, and to dignity. That is the only path to peace. Let us finally, collectively, embark on that journey. And thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine, and I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished ministers, colleagues, tomorrow we will mark 30 years to the day when a joint Iran and Hezbollah terrorist operation attacked a Jewish community center in Buenos Aires, Argentina, murdering 85 people and injuring hundreds of others. This should be a stark reminder of two things. Firstly, that Iran has been obsessed with killing Jews everywhere, not only in Israel. Secondly, that Iran has a global reach and is exporting its bloodshed and destruction to the four corners of earth. This has been going on now for decades. However, today, we once again meet to discuss the security situation in the Middle East. But again, instead of focusing on the root of the problem, the Council will focus on a symptom and not the cause. It is the same old discussion which brings us no closer to peace or security, not for Israel, not for the Palestinians, and not for the region. The true reason for the destruction, devastation, and bloodshed is apparently never to be named and addressed here. It is there for all to see, but there is seemingly a willful blindness here to name its name. This Council regularly ignores it. We also heard it today from the chef de cabinet, preferring to focus on Israel. It's always easier. There's a country in our region that is a rogue and failing state, the Islamic Republic of Iran. Iran is failing its people and has subjugated its citizens since 1979, when it launched a revolution that only brought destruction. If one looks at all of the major conflicts in the Middle East, one finds the nefarious fingers of Iran. The people of Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and many others have all suffered because of Iran's attempts to inflame the region. Iran condemns and attacks nations making peace with the State of Israel, as some Arab and Muslim nations have in recent years. However, Iran's leaders still receive the red carpet treatment here only because of hypocrisy or political interest. Since the beginning of the Islamic Revolution, we have heard the refrain, "Death to Israel," and the Zionist regime will be wiped from the pages of history or from the face of earth. They chant it in rallies, and drape their ballistic missiles with these genocidal slogans as they parade through the streets. Only 1 month ago, Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei published on his X account, and I quote, "Death to Israel 7 times, a clear call for genocide." Even the Iranian delegation to the United Nations has tweeted an open threat for the destruction of Israel a few weeks ago. Recently, Iran launched over 350 missiles and drones at Israel. What more needs to happen? Colleagues, Iran has taken its annihilationist obsession against the Jewish state to a whole new level, with the digital countdown clock in Tehran showing how many days remain until the destruction of Israel by the year 2040. This is a picture of that clock in the center of Tehran. And this has been ignored for too long. Do not look away. This is not a minor issue. It tells everyone the indisputable intention of the Iranian regime. It is a disgrace, and it will be your disgrace if this continues to be ignored. With the dozens of conflicts raging across the globe, there is no other United Nations member state publicly calling for the countdown to the destruction of another United Nations member state. Where is the outrage? Where is the condemnation? Where is the action? Where are your resolutions? This is a direct attack on the Charter of the United Nations. If nothing is done about these openly genocidal obsessions, then this Council will finally lose even its pretension as a force for peace. This clock is a warning for Israel, but also a warning for the world. If the world looks away from the open and wanton call for the destruction of our nation, then yours could be next. I demand that action is taken. There should be no more meetings with Iranian officials until they have removed this clock, stopped supporting and financing terrorism, and ended the calls for my country's destruction. Without such action, the State of Israel can only assume that this position is at best not taken seriously enough, and at worst, that is privately endorsed by some of you. These are not mere words, because while the clock continues to tick, the uranium enrichment centrifuges continue to spin. In April, the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency said that Iran is weeks away from having enough enriched uranium to develop a nuclear bomb. Last month, the IAEA Board of Governors called on Iran to abide by its international commitments and seize the dangerous development of its nuclear program. Council members, today you will once again debate the merits of Israel's justified response to the pogrom against Israel on October 7th, a Hamas pogrom financed and inspired by Iran, a pogrom that Iranian officials openly support. Since October 7th, the State of Israel has been attacked totally unprovoked from Lebanon, from Syria, from Iraq, and from Yemen. All of the terrorist groups targeting us have one thing in common, and you know it. They are directed from Tehran. If we reach a situation of full-scale war in Lebanon, it is only because Hezbollah has shot thousands of rockets at Israeli civilians with the support and funding of Iran. You cannot say you didn't know. All of this requires immediate action by this Council. Colleagues, the Islamic Republic of Iran is not just an Israel or a regional problem. Iran has supplied military equipment to be used against Ukraine. You know it. Its proxies have turned one of the major global shipping lanes in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden into no-go areas for international cargo ships. You all know that Iran stands behind these Houthi terror attacks, but you continue to bury your head in the sand and focus on us. Why? Why? Iran is the greatest threat to global stability because its ambitions and destruction are global. The Islamic Republic of Iran is the key to security and stability in the Middle East, and you ignore the key. The greatest outrage and most urgent to address are our 120 hostages, which are held by Iranian-supported and inspired terrorist organizations in Gaza. We demand their immediate and unequivocal release. We have seen again pictures of trembling 18-year girls only yesterday with injuries on their bodies and fear in their eyes. We do not dare to think what horrors they are experiencing at this very minute. I ask you, I beg you to look into their eyes and think about the sheer brutality of what Hamas is doing to them. The disgraceful situation of the hostages alone is a crime against humanity. But Hamas continues to exploit this Council's inaction by hiding its commanders among civilians and its military positions in UNRWA schools. Yes, they hide themselves in UNRWA schools, and you continue to ignore that. I can tell you all this. The war will not end until these hostages have been released. We will not leave a single hostage behind. By this brutal kidnapping by Hamas, they are copying the example, again, of their paymasters in Tehran. who starting in November 1979, as we all remember, held 53 American citizens for 444 days against all international norms and humanity. This was the first warning about the intentions of the Ayatollah regime, and now we are merely talking about their latest bloody outrage. For 45 years, the Islamic Republic of Iran has been fanatical about exporting its brand of terror and bloodshed near and far. If the Council continues to ignore the destructive role Iran plays in the Middle East, in all Middle East conflicts, then sadly there will be war and the bloodshed will continue unabated. But if you choose to address this issue properly, we can improve the chances of peace and security in the region. The choice is urgent. The choice is yours. The countless lives of those who will die because of the Ayatollah's grand ambitions for Shiite regional supremacy are in your hands. Iran wants to export their supremacist Shiite revolution to your nations, and their weapons are armies of terror proxies causing death in every country they touch. Do not be fooled by the sham election and the reformist new president of Iran. You know that he is merely another puppet of the Ayatollahs to try and avoid diplomatic pressure and put a pleasant mask on evil. Look at their deeds. Do not listen to their empty words. Probably you will hear it today. Those who continue to accept the fake nice words of Iranian officials know that they are just speaking with puppets played by the Ayatollah. The Ayatollah has become used to this council's inaction, and he feels that it gives him the green light to the attainment of nuclear weapons and the immunity to continue expanding the terror of his murderous proxies. Colleagues, I have shown you the Iranian countdown clock to the destruction of the State of Israel. This is a promise for a continuation of conflict and war for decades to come. This is a direct threat and incitement to genocide. Nevertheless, I will face that threat of prediction. If the Ayatollah regime in the Islamic Republic of Iran continues to threaten the region, intimidate and support its own people, attack its neighbors, and spill blood across the globe, it will find that its days are numbered. The proud Iranian people have had enough. The good people of the Middle East have had enough, and so have we. They all wait for the members of this council to pinpoint the true cause of conflict and bloodshed in our region. The Islamic Republic of Iran is a rogue state that is exporting its mayhem and destruction to all corners of the region. They are much, much bigger and more powerful than ISIS, and with near nuclear weapons capabilities. Iran's genocidal ambitions are not just a missing element in any conversation on Gaza. It's not just a missing element. They are the central element. Without taking meaningful action against Iran, the death and bloodshed will only increase and spread. This is the truth about the multiple front war against the Jewish state. It is time that this council address this true root cause of the war. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Israel for his statement. I will now make a statement in my capacity as the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, the Middle East region is facing unprecedented risks.
Я не понимаю, вы почетче.
I don't understand. Speak more clearly.
Кто-нибудь один, скажите.
One of you can speak clearly to say what you want to say.
Не хотите.
I see you don't wish to do so. Very well. The Middle East region faces unprecedented risks to the security, well-being, and peaceful lives of its peoples. Waves of violence are spilling out far beyond the the Arab-Israeli confrontation zone and are destabilizing the situation in the Persian Gulf, the Red and Mediterranean